statement is to know God, to love others, and advance God's kingdom. And if you got an opportunity to come out on Thursday, you got an opportunity for a praise and worship service that was just awesome. It really goes into our goal to know God, right? And a big piece of what we try to do is also advance God's kingdom. And one of, just a part of my heart here is that one of the biggest ways we advance God's kingdom is through discipleship. And we've been really focused on discipleship. If you've been thinking or wondering hey, how do I get involved in discipleship? Come to me, see me. We'd love for that to happen because I want to see everybody in this church involved in discipleship, growing, following Jesus first and foremost, but also meeting with other believers. And I'll be honest, my discipleship groups have been such an encouragement to me. And in those discipleship groups, we have 5 goals, right? And I preached about those 5 goals. That was the last sermon series that I did, which of course is Jesus following, self-feeding, church loving, kingdom advancing, and reproducing. And I just want to put those in the forefront. They have nothing to do with my sermon, but I want to just keep on saying those because if we put the goals in front of us, hopefully we'll hit those goals, right? That is something that is very important. Well, I am preaching this sermon series on the I Am. And as I was prepping for this sermon series, I was reminded of a story when I was a teenager. So when I was a teenager, I was a fairly difficult teenager, and I got in an argument with my parents. And it was a fall afternoon, a late fall afternoon, similar to today, and me and my parents are fighting, and I walk out of the house, and about 1/4 of a mile from our house was a state park named Damascus Forest, and I walked to the Damascus Forest, and me and my siblings had been there many, many times before, exploring the different parts of this forest, and I decided to walk into the forest just to blow off some steam, and I just kept on walking, and afternoon turned into evening, and it began to get dark, and I was lost. I had no clue where I was going. And as I began to walk, it almost got to pitch black out. It was right on the precipice of that. And I just started walking in one direction, hoping that I could get out of this vast forest. Well, I come up to a herd of deer. And I couldn't really see them. I didn't know that the deer were there. But interesting fact about deer, they make a noise. I did not know this before. Another interesting fact about deer is it's the same noise that a demon makes, right? It is this screeching noise that is awfully terrifying. And I was absolutely terrified. Luckily, eventually, I made out that they were deer and they ran and all that stuff. So I just kept on walking. And I am so lost in the woods. I don't know what I am going to do. And I'm like, wow, I have made a mistake. And then all of a sudden, I saw a light off in the distance. And I began to walk with new motivation. Hope began to well up inside of me. And I began to walk fast towards that light. Well, eventually, as I came up to the light, I realized that that was the light of an old campground about 4 miles away from my house. It was on a road, and I knew exactly where I was. That light reoriented the direction I now was going to go. I began to follow the road, and it gave me guidance. And as I'm walking along the road, a car pulls up, and it's my father, and he says, "Get in the car." I won't tell you the rest of the stuff that he told me because it's not safe for church, but I get in the car, and man, the warmth of the car was just amazing. And then I get home. While my father had not forgiven me for the argument, my mother was no longer worried about the argument, and she was just happy to have me home after hours of being missing. And so I got home and enjoyed the comfort of heat. Now I tell this story to illustrate something, and it illustrates light. That light can provide hope for us. It can provide guidance for us, and it can also provide comfort for us as well. In the darkest moments of life, light can bring new perspective. It can give us the ability to have hope, to have guidance, to have comfort. Now, all of us have heard stories about light. It's a common theme. For thousands of years, there has been stories about light. All of us have sung about light. If while you were walking in, you might have heard me sing "I Saw the Light" by Hank Williams Jr., right? This excited moment of seeing the light. There's even poems about darkness. I think of St. John of the Cross that wrote a poem about the dark night of the soul. Now, the thing about talking about darkness is that it's always in contrast to light. Always hoping for light. Always reaching out for light. And here's what's amazing. Darkness stops becoming darkness when light comes in. And today, we're talking about I am the light of the world. Jesus comes and he says to the people of Israel, I am the light of the world. This is found in John 8:12. We're going to be focusing on this verse. You can feel free to turn there. But like I said, you've heard stories. You've heard the story of Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. You have heard people talk about this. Maybe you even sung songs about Jesus being the light of the world. I can't say that word. But even my daughter, this whole week, we're singing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. We just keep on talking about it. But I have a question for you. Do you believe it? Do you believe that Jesus is the light of the world? Do you believe that? Because here's the thing about belief. It's not just thinking it. It's not just saying that you believe it. You live according to this belief. Everything in the world revolves around the fact that Jesus is the light of the world. So John 8:12. I'll read the full verse. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. As we've explored these I am statements, we've seen that Jesus, when he says I am, he's saying ego eimi, which in actual translation of this is I am, the repetitive I. And he didn't need to do that, but it's an emphasis on saying I really am, I truly am. The double emphasis on I is saying my whole being is this. And this is powerful. I think you know that it's powerful. As I bring up that Jesus is the light of the world, you know that this is a powerful statement. But when we study the passage, when we look at it, when we pull it apart, what we realize is that there is further significance to this. And when Jesus says this, he's saying, I'm your hope, I'm your guidance, and I'm your comfort. And man, is that a message that we all need to hear today. That Jesus is our hope, that Jesus is our comfort, and that he is our guidance. And so as we're preaching through this I am series and looking at the 7 I am statements, last week we looked at Jesus saying, I'm the bread of life, and we're going to look at I am the light of the world. Next week we're going to look at 2, I am the gate, and I am the good shepherd. And then the following weeks we're going to look at I am the resurrection, and the life. I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the vine. We're going to look at all 7 of them. But how we're going to do it is we're going to look back. We're going to take Jesus' word and look back to the Old Testament significance of it. And then we're going to look at Jesus' present context and try to realize what Jesus is saying and what John is trying to say through this passage. But then we're going to look and see how it applies to today. And so that's kind of the pattern that we're doing. There is a diving deeper section. It would be great if you read that diving deeper section this week. You can explore more how this is true. And really why I created that is I'm enjoying studying through this passage, all of these passages. And I've had a week of just reflecting on Jesus as the light of the world, and I want you to have that as well. So the Old Testament significance is the Festival of Tabernacle. And so we find out that Jesus actually says this statement during this festival. And there is a lot of significance to this. And how we know that is John chapter 7, verses 1 through 2, that say this. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of Tabernacles was near, and then if you keep reading, and it's in your diving deeper section, what you find out is his brothers try to convince him to go to Jerusalem. He decides to tell them, I'm not going right now. And then he goes up later in secret because his time had not come. It wasn't his time to die yet, and he knew that he would die in Jerusalem. But he goes up anyway, and he begins to teach about to all the people of Jerusalem. So what is the Festival of Tabernacles? Well, it's known as Sukkot, and it's actually being celebrated this week by the Jewish people. It's during October that they celebrate this. And I find this interesting. I began to dwell on this and focus on this. And here in America, when it's October, what are people decorating for? What are people celebrating? Well, it's Halloween. And maybe you're a good little Christian and you celebrate harvest, right? But really you're celebrating for Halloween. You just don't put the spooky things out. Well, as it gets cold, we begin to celebrate darkness a little bit. Now, listen, I'm not trying to be a crazy Christian that says, do not celebrate Halloween. That's not my point. It's just a cultural observation about the fact that we celebrate darkness to a certain extent. And what do the Jews celebrate? They celebrate light. When the days are getting shorter, when night is coming, when all of this is around, they celebrate light, not darkness. In Leviticus 23, 42 through 43, God institutes this holiday in the book. He tells Moses to tell the people of Israel, and this is how it is described. Live in temporary shelters, tabernacles, for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. So your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord, or Yahweh, your God. Sam Nedler actually gives us a description of what this would have looked like in Jesus' day. He says, 4 lamps were set up in the temple where they glowed each evening of the Festival of Tabernacles. To trim their wicks and replenish their oil, young men of priestly lineage climbed to the height of 75 feet. These grand candelabras stood in the temple court of the women where the treasury was. It was said their lights were so bright they illuminated all the courts in Jerusalem. Armed with flaming torches, men whirled and danced beneath their glow to the music of harps, lyres, cymbals, and trumpets. So this is a week of hope. They're celebrating this week of hope that God will provide through the winter, that God will provide through the coldness. And they know that God can do it because they remember Exodus. This was supposed to remind them of the 40 years in wilderness, which God brought them out of and brought them into the promised land. But Jesus comes in and he says, hey, listen, you're celebrating hope for a week? What if I told you there was something of hope for eternity? And he says, I am the light of the world. See, holidays are great. They help us remember. They remind us of all of these great things. But the problem is sometimes we leave those holidays aside and we don't take them throughout the whole year. You are not supposed to celebrate the resurrection just on Easter Sunday. You're supposed to celebrate it every Sunday. Oh yeah, and then not only do you celebrate it every Sunday, you celebrate it every single day of the year. That is the point of having times to reflect and think about it. Yes, we celebrate Easter, but man, it's great to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus today. Oh yeah, and on Tuesday, we should be celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. Same with Christmas. Thank goodness God is with us. Emmanuel, God with us. But we don't just remember that on Christmas, every single day. I think about this, and I think about all that's going on in Israel. And Israel needs hope. Israel needs hope right now. So maybe you do too. Maybe you're discouraged by the world. Maybe you heard Murph talking and saying it's going to come here. And you have fear and anxiety from that. And you're like, oh no, what am I going to do? What about my children? Maybe you heard about the bomb threat. Whatever it may be, the hope you need is Jesus. The light of the world. Because here's the truth. Any other hope that you have will go away. Every other light will dim. Every other light will miss the mark. I think of my girls, and at my house, we waste a lot of electricity at nighttime. And here's what I mean. My daughter's closet light is on all night, and then in the morning I don't see it, it gets left on. So that light is on all the time. And my daughters are like looking at it. Each night they're like, is that dimmer? Is that going to go out? Because they're afraid that the light may go out. And guess what? It is. Eventually the light bulb will dim, and I'll have to replace it. But Jesus, as the light of the world, is something greater, something bigger. And it leads to the second point. Jesus, the light of the world, exceeds other lights because he dwells among us. So, as we read this passage, I'm going to read John 8:12 again. And it says this: when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So he says this at the Festival of Tabernacle, and he uses this phrase, light of life. And what this is meant to do is draw us back to John chapter 1. So if you want to turn there, we're going to look at John chapter 1. And really what John is doing is he's reminding us of Jesus' words and drawing us back to the beginning of his gospel. So John 1:1 says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Jesus is the Word, and he is in his very nature God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And so, with this simple phrase, John draws us back to the beginning of his gospel. And at the beginning of his gospel, we are drawn back to Genesis. Maybe you've read John 1:1 and said, hey, this sounds familiar. Because the beginning of the Bible, if you turn to the first page in Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what does he do immediately following that? He says, let there be light. The word spoken, the word made flesh, was spoken and created light. But it gets more interesting. In John 1:14, it says this, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. You might say, what? That's okay. It says that. How does this connect? Well, that word, dwelling among us, is the word for tabernacle. The word became flesh and tabernacled among us. He dwelled among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who comes from the Father, full of truth, our grace and truth. John goes further and says that God dwells among us. He lives among us. That means that when you make your prayers to God and you cry out to God and you say, God, I'm going through this hard time. I'm going through this darkness. You don't understand. Yes, he does, because Jesus came into the world and lived among us. He experienced darkness. He experienced pain. He experienced war. And he dwells in that pain with us. But it goes further. Now that Jesus died and rose again, he lives inside us. This light extends to us. There's an opportunity for the light of the world, Jesus, to extend. And you know how he does that? Through us. I'm not making this up. This is in the Bible. Matthew 5:14 says, Jesus says to his disciples, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. 1 Peter 2:9 says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, God's special possession, so that you may proclaim the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Isaiah 49:6, an Old Testament reference, prophesying towards the future, says this about Israel: I will also make you a light to the Gentiles, that my salvation should reach the ends of the earth. Isaiah 58:10, talking about the good deeds of the people of God, says this: if you do the good deeds, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like noonday. If you're wondering where the light is, well, it's inside of you. But it's not on your own. It's not inside of you. If Jesus doesn't dwell inside of you, if you don't rely on the light of the world, then you don't have the light. But if we rely on the light of the world, Jesus saying, I am the light of the world, you will never walk in darkness, we have hope. We cannot do this without Jesus. The light that the world needs is inside of you if you are a follower of Christ. Whenever the world is at its darkness and it seems like there is no hope, the answer is Jesus. Jesus is the hope. Colossians 1:27 says this: to them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles. So he is actually pulling from Isaiah 49:6, It says, to them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. What's the hope of the world? Christ in you. There's a Harry Potter quote. I know I'm a heathen for quoting Harry Potter, but I'm going to change it because it's not so, I don't like it. It says, like, happiness can be found, but I think it's better put this way. Hope can be found even in the darkest of times, if only one remembers to turn to the light. When we turn to the light, we are able to provide the light to the world, provide hope to the world. The truth is, the world doesn't need better policies. It doesn't need wise people. It doesn't need more tolerance. It doesn't need more charities in and of themselves. The world needs more Jesus. It needs more of Christ in you, the hope of glory. I'm not saying that those things are bad, but they're nothing without Jesus unless it is framed and pushed on Jesus and focused on Jesus. We miss the point. So how can our light, Jesus, not our light, but our light, Jesus, how can focusing on that change the world? Well, I'll give you the answer to all three. So I have three there. It's hope, guidance, and comfort. It's as simple as that. Number one is hope. Well, Isaiah 9:1 is giving a prophetic word about the Messiah, given hundreds of years before Jesus ever came. And this is how the prophet talks about Jesus. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the deep darkness, a light has dawned. That's the same chapter in which it says, unto us a child is born, and the government will rest on his shoulder. The only way to bring hope into a situation is by bringing Jesus. When I was in middle school, I learned one of my favorite words was oxymoron. Because you could say moron in school while still seeming educated, right? But I'm sure you've heard of oxymorons. Bittersweet, right? There's bitter and sweet are opposites, and yet they work together. This is my least favorite. Plastic silverware. It's not plastic silverware. Once it becomes plastic, then it's plasticware. So if you've been saying this, you can repent now, and you can stop saying it, right? It is plasticware. Civil war. Civil means peace. War is not peace. It's the opposite. Or jumbo shrimp, right? These are oxymorons. They're two opposites used in the same word. Well, another one is hopeless Christians. There is no such thing as a hopeless Christian. No such thing. If you're a Christian, you are hopeful. If you look at the world and you have a lack of hope, you have a lack of theology. If you look at the world and you have a lack of hope, you have a lack of theology. This is what made Christianity stick. This is what brought our religion to the largest religion in the world. That when plagues were happening, when people were dying, as the Roman officials deserted the regular people and went out to the countryside because they had no hope, what happened? The Christians went in and nursed them back to health. They didn't care about the hope here. They had eternal hope. Hope no matter what. Now, here's what I'm not saying. Don't hear what I'm... Be otherworldly to have hope. You don't have to not grieve the loss of people, not mourn things, not speak out on injustice. I'm not standing up here and yelling at you because you're speaking out on injustice. Good. That's what we should be doing. But nothing should subtract from our hope. Christ has risen from the dead. Christ has risen from the dead. My hope is found in that. And nothing else matters, because I know God, who raised up Jesus Christ on the third day, can do anything. My marriage is falling apart. It's not actually, okay, but my marriage is falling apart. I know that God can resurrect that marriage. I'm addicted to drugs. I know that God can heal even the strongest addiction. Terrible sinner, the worst of all sinners. Good news. Jesus resurrected Paul's life too. He says, I'm the worst sinner. Anxiety and worry about what might happen in the world. Well, guess what? The impossible has happened. Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. You think he's not powerful enough? You think he can't do it? Now, I'm not saying he will do it, but guess what? He has the whole world in his hands. If that doesn't give you hope, I don't know what will. Christ Jesus has risen again from the dead. The hope the world is looking for is Jesus. The second is guidance, right? I think of the passage in Psalms 119, 105, which we do the pledge to the Bible each and every Wednesday, and I hear this verse all the time. Psalm 119, 105 says this, Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. What happens when you put the light down? If you're carrying a lantern and you put the light down and you keep walking, you won't be able to see anymore. That's what the psalmist is saying. I'm going to carry this word for as far as I can, because with it I can see. But the great thing about Jesus is you never have to put him down. You get to take him with you, and through that, through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, you have Jesus with you no matter what. And it brings clarity and understanding and wisdom to every single situation. When we read the Old Testament where Christ is not mentioned, we see Christ because we look at everything through Christ. We look at everything through him. When we look at brokenness in the world, when we look at confusion, when we look at people hurting, we look at it through the eyes of Christ, through the guidance of Jesus. I keep on quoting C.S. Lewis on this, but he says, I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun. Not only because I see it, but by it, I see everything else. Do we see everything through the light of the world? I think we'd be more compassionate if we did. Jesus' guidance allows us to be incarnational. That by Jesus dwelling inside of us, we realize that we need to meet people where they're at. We need to dwell among the people because that's what Jesus did. And this supersedes any ideology, any philosophy in the world. It's amazing. By nature, as a Christian, you are supposed to reflect the light of the world. Now, I understand some of you have some broken lights, right? Maybe I do too, right? And maybe you're looking at my life and you're like, man, that is one broken light. But I'll tell you, broken lights mend lives. If you could just shine some of Jesus' light on the world. If our steps can be guided by the light of the world, people will notice. And we will bring light to the world by pointing towards Jesus. The last one is comfort. And we miss this in the 21st century. How does light bring comfort? Well, we miss this because we have heating systems. We're warm. You are being warmed by a heating system right now in this church. And you're not being heated by the lights up there. But in Jesus' time, the light would have also provided warmth, a fire, just to warm our bodies. And as the days get cold, the Jewish people celebrate the warmth that God provides in Sukkot. This reminds us that Jesus is a place of rest, that even the cold heart can soften. I personally love the fall. It's actually my favorite time of the year, mainly because it's cold, but not cold enough for me to be cold. But it is cold for the rest of my family, right? They're all bundled up. They're wearing sweatshirts. They're freezing cold outside. And this is why I like this. I'm going to give you my secret, is that when little kids are cold, they want to be warm, right? And so they look for the warmth of their father to warm them. And so they snuggle. And I love that part of the snuggle until they put like a barefoot on my back, and then there's just sharp cold pierces. But I want you to take that metaphor and think about your father, who wants to provide comfort as you crawl into his arms and find rest and warmth for your soul. We also know that light brings healing. If you're getting sick all the time, you need more vitamin D. And what provides vitamin D but sunlight? Also, you will be able to focus better if you have sunlight. In fact, if you're looking at your phone at night and you're scrolling on your phone, it actually hurts your sleep because you're looking at light and it's helping you focus and it's waking you up more. So light brings comfort, brings guidance, and it brings hope. So when you look at Jesus, when you hear about the great I am, that Jesus, the light of the world, I want you to think about these things and how you may reflect on that light metaphor. What I love about this is that my children can easily understand that Jesus is the light of the world. But yet, it's vast enough to keep us chewing for a lifetime. So if you need hope, if you need guidance, if you need comfort, come to Jesus, who is the light of the world. Would you stand with me as I pray? Lord, we thank you and we praise you that you are the light of the world, that the only way out of darkness is finding you, is coming into contact with you, is being focused on your Son, Jesus. I thank you that he came and he dwelt and he brought light to the world, that we no longer need to remain in darkness, but walk into that wonderful light. May we embrace the only one true light, and that is Jesus of Nazareth. Thank you. Amen.